Hello, welcome to the Live to 110 podcast. My name is Wendy Myers, and you can find me at live to110.com. And you can find this video podcast on the corresponding blog post on the website and on the YouTube channel, Wendy Live to 110. Today we're interviewing my friend, Mark Laisure. I love his name, and he's a great person, and we're going to be talking about how to feed your body and brain with positive thinking and how to change your thoughts and your energy levels and achieve your goals that you want. Many times negative thoughts and negative energy and negative people can really hold you back in a profound way from reaching your goals and for being your best self and reaching your higher purpose. So we've got a very deep show on the roster today, so stay tuned. This show is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or health condition and is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Please consult your healthcare practitioner before engaging in any treatment that we suggest on the show. And I'm so thrilled to announce finally we have launched the Bio Rehab program. By the time this podcast airs, you can find my new online health program at bodybioRehab.com. I wanted to create this program as just a very basic intro into the 5 pillars of health and all the information that I've learned over the last few years and interviewing all the top experts on the world. I wanted to condense it into this amazing online program that I've spent about 6 months working on. And it talks about the diet that you should be eating, doing a 30-day paleo reset, just to get rid of a lot of foods that people are eating they're probably sensitive to. Taking the right supplements, taking very basic supplements, including lots of minerals. Many people are not taking enough minerals or the right forms. So I tell you the basic supplements I think everybody should be taking. I also talk about exercise and flexibility, cardio, high intensity interval training, flexibility, strength training. Talk about a lot of different aspects of exercise and how much you should be doing. Also, I talk about stress, how to reduce stress and stress relief techniques. I think that's critically important to have a healthy body. I also go into sleep and how to improve your sleep and many aspects of sleep, why it's important, and supplements you can take to improve your sleep. Many people need assistance to get a quality night's sleep. Then lastly, I talk about detoxification, one of my very favorite subjects, because I don't believe people can be healthy unless they have a daily, lifelong detoxification plan. So I talk about all my favorite detox techniques and detox supplements, etc. So as you can see, it's a very comprehensive program. So go check it out at bodybioRehab.com. Our guest today, Mark Laisure, has a very impressive resume. It's going to take me a while to get through it. He is the executive producer, co-founder, and co-host of the Life Changes Show. It's an amazing radio show that you can see at bbcradio.com. His specialties include intuitive strategic guidance, NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. He's a hypnotherapist, a hypnotherapy certification, and a timeline therapy certification. I have no idea what that is, but it sounds really interesting. Mark is also a venture strategist, inventor, and award-winning entrepreneur. He's won an Emmy Award, R&D 100 Award, an NAB Award, and a Business Week Product of the Year. His primary focus has been on disruptive technologies, sustainable business solutions, conscious media, and transformational events. Mark has been a guiding force behind several startups, takeovers, and turnarounds, most notably in Inktomi Corporation, acquired by Yahoo, Terranex Video Processing, and Mesh Networks, acquired by Motorola. Mark has devoted considerable effort towards a greater understanding of the psychology of transformation and global awareness of consciousness and healing. He has a general interest in promoting unity and new and cutting-edge innovations, systems, and culturally viable solutions which advocate a harmonious, integrated lifestyle for all here at home on planet Earth. Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about how you got into health and doing your Life Changes show?
Well, I was born. I think that's where it starts. And I'm being cheeky, but yes, it's also true. This has evolved as very much a life path for me. My journey has lots of twists and turns along the way, and it never really made sense until I got into or began stepping into purpose. And stepping into purpose both from a corporate perspective, but more so from a personal perspective in terms of really owning how I see the world, how I view myself. I'm a little bit, anybody that knows me, I'm a little bit different in that I've always been, I guess, as a child was called overly sensitive. As an adult, I would say it's very introspective. Um, I watch my own life as a TV show, and I really evaluate every choice, every mistake, every challenge, every success, to see what did I do to contribute to that? What could I have done differently? What did I learn from it? I have now the tools to watch from that perspective, as opposed to being hypercritical, overly, self-critical, when you're younger, maybe, challenging yourself or being overly sensitive, things like that. I think, as you grow older, and especially the path that I've taken to really learn, to go inward, to read, to build on top of a psychology background, which when I went down that path, I didn't realize I'd end up where I am now. So that kind of all comes together after a whole series of changes. I started out as a child performer, singer, vocalist, band geek. Saxophone for most of my childhood. I stopped that and I went out for sports. And for all the reasons that many go through, the bullying, the lack of understanding, the wanting to be part of a different crowd, and that led me though into a successful avenue, which sports took me all the way into college, and ended up in business from there. And so there's a whole series of very direct twists and turns that really embody where I'm operating from now, which is embodied in the two words that accompany our show and the business that I build from, which is life changes.
Yeah, tell us about that radio show. I was very, appreciative you asked me to be a guest on your very popular radio show. Can you tell us a little bit about that and the genesis of beginning that show?
Thank you. Well, the show has evolved over the past 6 years now. I was gifted the introductions of two beautiful people in Filippo Voltaggio and Dorothy Donahue. And at the time, I was pursuing some venture work around a general concept of conscious content. And that was the idea of producing content, like we're doing right now, that ultimately would use the grid for a higher purpose. So getting information out, exploring truths, asking questions, anything that's socially impactful or ultimately bringing something positive to the, to humanity, to the planet. So I was already in that realm, and Filippo had an idea for a radio show, which was Life Changes with Filippo, and we decided to team up and have been doing both the radio show and live events, and are now in a process of shifting from audio radio format into a more video-driven and live event format as we go forward.
Yeah. Yeah. I've known you for about 10 years, and I was really surprised. I didn't know that you were doing this show, this amazing health show, and that you've been doing it for so long. But it's a great show. I think it's an amazing format. And I saw you have an amazing lineup of guests and over 300 shows. Can you tell the audience where they can listen to your show?
Absolutely, and thank you for that. And you were certainly one of our highlight guests, so we really enjoyed that conversation. The show can be found at either domain, lifechangesnetwork.com or lifechangeshow.com. And it's broadcast every Monday night at 7 p.m. live on the BBS Radio Internet Radio Network, which is bbsradio.com. But again, you can go to our domain to not only listen to the live show on Monday evenings, 7 p.m. Pacific, or there's an archive with all of those past shows as we've embarked on this journey of sharing our journeys together and the journeys of our guests, and really just sharing information, exploring topics, and allowing our listeners to both interact with that as they go away from listening to the show, but also take away from it what might be right for them in their present moment of their kind of growth and expansion.
Well, let's talk a little bit about our subject today on the show, how to feed your brain. Can you talk a little bit about what, in your opinion, is the best way to feed your brain?
When I talk about or think about feeding our brains, and that extends to the whole system, the brain, the body, but we'll start with the brain. I think it's because we, at least I, with a kind of middle class upbringing, Midwest, south of Cleveland, Ohio, I learned the basics of health, and I learned the 3 food groups, and I learned some of those things that we're taught in that type of a system. But very meat and potatoes upbringing, and not a lot of detail in the broader sense of who we are from a mind, body, spirit perspective. And the more that I got into various aspects of my work in the sciences, I started coming across different disciplines, research papers, or individuals that were doing bodies of research that started to overlap, and they looked at the power of thought and the mind, and how that affects our bodily, our chemistry, and then aspects that go above and beyond that when you start looking at quantum science and quantum healing, but this whole idea that we're connected, and to just look at our system, our body, our brain, the way we function, our emotions from just a physical perspective of what we're ingesting is only one component. And the more I learned, the more I started to understand that we are ingesting information which is translated by the body in its chemistry all day long. And what I mean by translated, as opposed to, we know that when we eat and we chew and that food turns into energy, that's one translation. In this, or from this perspective, the translation might be, are we watching things that are fearful or inspiring or life affirming or life challenging? Are they happy topics or sad topics? And that all is taken into the chemistry of our programming, our thought process, and that contributes to how our brain monitors or reacts or establishes our, the way we're being and the decisions we're making or how we're feeling from moment to moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about your concept of kinesiology? Can you tell us, the listeners, a little bit about your thoughts on how that comes into feeding our brain?
Well, I bring kinesiology, applied kinesiology, has taken on some tangential research and exploration by some very important researchers, I feel. But it had it had grown to an accepted applied science, mainly used by the chiropractors, but now used throughout the medical establishment, from doctors to nurses, holistic practitioners, etc. And the basics of applied kinesiology have been that our body registers, our muscular structure will register strong. We can actually have a strong reaction to something that's positive for us. And we can actually have a negative reaction, or a weak reaction to a negative or something that's not good for us. So they've used it to identify organs that may not function or may not be functioning, and then to identify mineral deficiencies or potentially allergies or things that are affecting the functioning of certain organs. That, however, goes above and beyond the physical nature of it into what is good or potentially not good for us in the way of thought, all the way into things that we're hearing, things that we're reading, lyrics, frequencies. It's pretty heady science, but I would point you to two researchers that, of course, like anything that's new, are maybe controversial is too strong of a word, but of course they have proponents and opponents in terms of the type of research they've done. But it is sustained, and there's a big body of knowledge, and it's now being corroborated by other sciences. And one of those is Dr. David Hawkins, who actually took the idea of kinesiology and then over 30 years across thousands of patients started to calibrate the strong versus weak response according to not only the physical structure, but according to the emotional spectrum, from positive emotions on down through negative emotions, from love to fear and everything in between, and then starting to look at the strong or weak response versus events in people's lives, events out in everyday, in everyday living, past events, and then assigning those to a vibratory spectrum. So it gets kind of heady, but the basic idea is that our bodies, our gut feeling, that knowing that we have inside is connected. And so our bodies, when they say a strong response, that physical response is also part of our gut feeling or our knowing. When they say go with your first gut, well, that's your body saying that's good for me. And Dr. Hawkins' work simply stated that our body knows the difference between truth or the absence of truth. And that could be the difference between holding sugar or natural honey is a better example versus aspartame or an artificial sweetener. Your body will react strong if you're testing or resisting in a muscle movement versus react weak to the chemical or something that's not as good for you. And so then applying that to positive thinking and concepts. And then the reason this is important, and then I'll come back to this to the second researcher, but the reason this is so critically important is that as we are thinking, our body has a chemical reaction to those thoughts. And so not only are we seeing that muscular structure, but that is also correlating to the chemistry that we are creating in our bodies, which then affect our energy levels, our moods, our ability to focus, our ability to heal ourselves, our ability to actually digest the good foods that you're recommending to all your readers and listeners. So it's all tied together. It's a larger way of looking at our total system, our total being.
A lot of practitioners also use that same muscle testing with supplements to find out which supplements their clients will react better to.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the idea is that if you really went under the surface, everybody always says, boy, if I had a truth machine, but your body, your heart, your knowingness really is a truth machine. And we pick and choose when we want to believe certain things. And you hear people say, follow your heart or listen to your gut instinct. Well, that is true across the board. And so the more that we can tap into our own knowing, our body's response to what is right, and more importantly, listen to it.
Yeah.
What we do is, nah, that's all right, that cake's too good, I have to have another piece. When you kind of knew, maybe I'm, taking in too much sugar, or maybe I've had enough today, or maybe I'm, whatever the case may be, we go against what we really know. And so I think it really then becomes, it comes down to discipline of listening to the responses that we're getting across the board, like you're saying, supplements, food, the thoughts, to how you spend your day.
Yeah, every time I make a decision that goes against my gut, later I always regret it. I regret it because you always know the right decision to make if you really tap into yourself and listen. And I always regret, going against that grain.
Absolutely. And then I think if you step back and you look at which decisions you're not listening to yourself on, then you start to see the patterns. Yeah. And I think that's where the bigger healing comes from, is when you start to reveal, the repetition of, well, I did it again. And that plays into addictions. It plays into the underlying emotional causes of what the addiction is masking. So I think it really starts to play into various aspects of, the fact that the answers are there that allow us to pursue a better way of being. Now, the question is, are we disciplined enough to see them and honor that and kind of move into establishing new habits, better habits?
Yeah, it's a lot of work. There's little small steps every single day.
Small steps. Well, and so that goes back to feeding your brain, right? Mm-hmm. And the second researcher that is, and there's many out there, but these I think are some low-hanging fruit that people can get immediate impact by looking at some of what they've done, is Dr. Masaru Emoto, who wrote a book called Messages from Water. And he got a lot more notoriety this year for passing, so his work's out there again in a big way because it's been so beneficial to so many, and quantum science and new research is really validating a lot of this. But what he did was to harness or recognize the power of words and thought and intention on water. And the correlation is that we are, whatever the percentage is, 76% or something, our bodies are water, our brain is 90% water. So when you start looking at his work and what it means in terms of, he would take words and put them on glasses of water, or he would have groups that would set an intention, and he would take a photo of the crystallization moment, the moment of freezing for a molecule of water, either under the influence of having this word attached to it or phrase, or having a group or an intention set. And you would look at kind of the before and the after. And the pictures and the body of science really speaks for itself. The beauty, the natural structure that would happen in the water from positive words and affirmations, love and joy and gratitude and these things, versus the kind of disoriented or destructive structures of the water underneath words of hate or anger, or even destructive phrases that were commanding someone to do something rather than suggesting collaboration, like let's do something together, versus you need to do this for me, or follow that order, whatever the case may be. So it really gets into the nuances of how water is affected by words, by intent, and then ultimately you start to look at what are we taking in on a daily basis? What kind of words are we looking at? And so to your point, and where I started going at the feeding the brain, I think the interesting part is we want things in our lives and we say we're going to do something a certain way, but yet we're behaving differently in what we do all day long. So I want to live a happy life, as someone might say, and at the same time they're listening to broken down cowboy songs all day, or Adele, or whatever other beautiful yet somewhat tragic, sad songs that have to elicit a state of sadness, because that's what it's about. And those are the emotions that it's conjuring up. And so I think that's where, when I say feed your brain, you start to look at what are you listening to, what are you watching on TV, what are you reading, what are the words that are around in your daily basis, how are you speaking to one another. Yeah. There's a direct response, and it's a direct effect on our beings and the beings of the people that are around us.
Yeah, that's very, very powerful. I learned a lot about neuro-linguistic programming from Tony Robbins when I was in my late teens, 19. And it was very, very powerful about how the thoughts that you think can have a profound effect on your entire life and relationship and decisions. And you have a background in neuro-linguistic programming. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that profoundly affects our thinking and behavior?
It's a science that I came to learn and get certified through Ted James' company. I guess it's been 2 years now since I got the certifications, but I too, a better part of 2 decades ago, started doing the Tony Robbins workshops as well, and so it's kind of been around. And I've read other books and have followed up other experts in the category, like some of the early ones, like Dale Carnegie and Zig Ziglar and this and that. So the knowledge has been here, but yet we haven't used it. And the whole idea is that our subconscious mind and our conscious mind in collective is a base of programming. And everything that we take on that we ingest in terms of what we're seeing, in terms of what we're reading and learning, becomes part of our programming. And so the idea of neurolinguistic programming is that words and thoughts affect ourselves and affect others very specifically. And entrainment in terms of the repetition of what we're hearing is very effective. And kind of the corporate world knows this, the political world knows this. There's a lot of science that's used in how products are sold to people, and why all of a sudden you have this compelling, this need or desire for a product that you never needed or wanted before, and probably don't really have a need for, but suddenly you think that you have to have it. And it's because of the way that words are used to embed our consciousness to create a reference point or a program that then says, that feeds back in our actions, whether it's buying a product or eating a certain food or that. And that's what neurolinguistic programming in its essence is recognizing and knowing how to program the brain through the use of words and marketing and repetition.
Yeah, I know our mutual friend Susan Leahy is the queen of positive thinking.
See it.
She's been on the podcast before, and she's a motivational speaker, and she's always
She's
talking about
fantastic.
writes the words yes, write yes 60 times on a piece of paper, and has really worked really hard to train her brain to think positively all the time. And something that I do too, to try to reprogram myself, is to do EFT, emotional freedom techniques, to try to tap away the negative energy, and a meditation to kind of emotionally detox, so to speak. There's lots of different techniques. Can you talk about some that you like to use to help to emotionally detox, so to speak,
I
reprogram yourself?
I can. I want to mention real quick, since you brought up Susan, it's a perfect example because, we're all on a journey and we've known each other for a long time, and she's a perfect example. Her family is a perfect example of putting the actions to practice. I mean, that's a family that really walks their talk. They walk their love. They have embodied those habits and those practices that she started years ago to employ. And so it's a perfect example. She's a great example of doing that. I have become very, very critical of what I'm ingesting on a daily basis. So people spend a lot of time and energy in whether or not they're going to be on a certain diet, or whether they're eating raw, or whether they're eating carbs or all sugars. Or I put just as much time and energy now into what I'm seeing and hearing and reading at even a subconscious level. So to the same point that Susan does with the yes, I have affirmations creatively placed throughout the household and in my office. I'm very careful now, even if I love some of the older music, I'm very careful what I listen to in mass. If I'm listening to the same songs over and over, I don't go back to some of the same songs, even though I might want to go down on a walk on memory lane. If it has a message that isn't taking me to a higher level, or isn't lifting me up, or isn't good for whoever is around me, then I'm trying not to take that in. One of the best things I ever did was getting rid of cable TV.
Yeah.
And thank gosh, with the internet, you can still watch. I'm not disconnected from the world. And of course, you can still get news, but I don't have the negative affirmations of mainstream news in my face. And I used to walk into the office and flip on CNN and flip on CNBC and have two TVs running, one on, volume one off, so I could get all the information. Well, all the information was mostly negative or distractionary.
Yeah, I agree. I used to do the same thing, and now I'm blissfully ignorant because I don't want to know all that negative news from all over the world. I get my news from friends telling me bad things that happen. And
exactly. So
I'm
you can
happy.
keep up on current events once it gets to a place, but you realize, you know what, you don't really need to follow that trial for 6 months, or you don't need to follow, a bullying situation or whatever. And as important as those may be in their individual spaces, there's all sorts of good going on that we could be following, and what we focus on expands. So in terms of feeding your brain, you're feeding your being, you're feeding your soul, and you're feeding and affirming your way of doing things. So it's about building good habits. And people, like I said, it goes back to how honest are we with ourselves. We say, oh, well, that's not a big deal. I used to watch that when I was a kid, or I used to eat that when I was a kid. And then those are the same people that are complaining that this isn't in their life, or they're having these challenges, and they're not looking at where maybe the two have set a ceiling. And so rather than, sometimes you don't even realize, I like to use the radio, old school radio, for example, where you would dial in music, and sometimes you could hear the music, but it wasn't tuned all the way in, right? So maybe you're getting the basics of the percussion, and you can hear some horns, but you're not getting all the strings because they're faint. Whereas if you tune it in more, then all of a sudden, wow, the fullness of the music. It could be the same thing. I believe it's the same thing with our bodies. And the more of the wrong chemicals that we're creating, the more out of tune we are, and the less we're getting the entire, orchestration that we have access to if we're in peak, optimized performance. So sometimes I think we just don't even realize how good it can be because we're stuck in certain habits.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's also very important to be responsible energetically, where, say, if I'm in a bad mood or whatnot, I try to be very careful not to be mean to the cashier or the waitress or whoever it is, or my husband, because that negativity reverberates to the next person that they're mean to or irritable with, and to the next person, and it kind of creates this wave that reverberates throughout the universe, this negativity that you put out there. I think that's important to think about too.
The proverbial kicking the cat.
Yeah.
Right? But it's a great example. It's a great discussion, and there's now a whole new body. Lynn McTaggart has some great books. She's a researcher that looks into field science and the idea of our auric field with our light body. What's going on outside of our body is a big component now, and we're starting to learn more of that and actually getting a better. We have the science to monitor it better. We have more empirical research. We have some groups that are doing great studies in this area, like the Institute for Noetic Science up in Northern California for 35 and 40 years has been doing, studies around what is happening in the exchange of energy that's going on. So when you talk about being careful to not give that out, this is how this to me is penultimate to feeding our brains and how we relate to the entire community. And I wish I would have had this information as a child, but we are senders and receivers of information. Our heart actually sends and receives to an exponent 10 plus times as much information as our brains do, and it does it more quickly. And so going back to that point of the strong response and our knowingness, we're also sending out that vibration. So oftentimes somebody can walk into the room having a bad day and have brought that bad day into the room for everybody else to share, and not a word was exchanged. Just because they've walked in with that vibration, that energy, and what they don't realize is they just flip the anger switch on to that room of 20 people that they're now in. And if anybody else is having a bad day and the wrong things, said, then suddenly, boom, there's an argument or whatever, or it raises that anger vibration rather than having, really left it behind and bringing in a peaceful state and potentially flipping the anger switch off on everyone. But we volley back and forth. And if I can, for just a second, I'll give you one example, because I started playing with this at a conscious level. And it really comes, it's part of how owning it ourselves, right? Being a cause for our own world. What are we doing to contribute to this situation? And one time I was having a challenging day, and this was during the market crash back in 2009, and I'd gone through some challenging times, and I went into a bank and I needed to get a check cashed, and they wanted to hold the check. And the
flipped out.
Well, I was on the precipice of flipping out, and the teller was clearly not having a good day either. And so I went through this whole mental dialogue, and I did get to a state of anger, and I was already there. I was in entrainment with him. I was in an exchange of frustrated energy, and as he walked away, having said there was nothing that I could do, I said, you know what? I'm going to change state. I'm going to give this opportunity or give the situation the opportunity for a different outcome. And I sent him love in my mind. I changed my energy. I sent him love. I said, okay, I understand you're doing your job. This is my situation. It's okay. And do you know that he turned around, walked back, and said, I cleared the whole thing. Have a great day.
Oh, wow.
And it was a complete shift. And the only thing that I did was go in and address my energy and kind of to take control of what I could control, which was myself. And I think that was a big lesson. And now I try to practice that on a daily basis. And I recognize when I'm not doing good at it, how I've contributed to situations. Or, I do it with my son, watching what's going on and how we're affecting and how he may be having a bad day. And I look at, and rather than going, you're not behaving, I realize, wow, I've been a little frustrated, or I'm stressed about work, or whatever the case may be. I can dial it back, and then suddenly it unfolds in the way he's behaving. So, again, being a cause for our state, our energetic state, as well as what we're putting into our bodies, affects everything around us.
Yeah, and I think people really need to take responsibility of that. I think there's a lot of people that really feel a victim to their emotions and a victim to their bodies and whatnot. And we do have a tremendous amount of control over our emotional states, and we just need tools. Can you talk about some of your ideas about how we monitor our daily intake and diet as it relates to mental activity? I
think it's the tool is awareness. I think you have to do an assessment first of your home and your surroundings. You have to realize what you're dealing with, and you have to look at your habits. So what happens when you go to a dietitian, or a doctor, or even if you're getting information on allergies, they ask you to take a diary of what are you eating for a period of time, so that they can then assess how many burgers, how many this, how many that, what's your calories, counting, and then you can say, oh, wow, well, here's a problem. You're doing too much of this or not enough of that. And you can start. I think it's the same way at a very rudimentary level. So it doesn't have to have, you don't have to go out and do tons of research. What you do is actually say, how much TV am I watching? What are the shows that I'm watching? What are the songs that I'm listening to? What kind of music? Is it angry? Is it happy? I like to joke around. I was talking to a friend the other night how, when you're in love and everything's great, and, you're more apt to turn on that Air Supply album, But we chuckled about that. But you get the gist of that. And then on the other side is you're angry, and you're more apt to listen to an aggressive music and a Pearl Jam or a Metallica or whatever the case may be. And people don't realize that there is a resonance with this kind of thing. So I think awareness and cataloging, identifying how you're spending your day. And then you can start to say, wow, I get it. When I'm looking at it from this perspective, I can realize that I'm watching, these kind of movies, which are either angry or, sad, or and that coupled with the songs, or, so you start looking at the books we're reading, the idea of escaping, and then you're escaping into a sad story. You become that sad story. And this is where I think it's interesting, was we have a habit of taking certain knowledge as truth in one area, yet not applying it to other areas. And the one that comes to mind is running track. You've seen studies now, and I think a lot of TV shows, science shows, talk about how when athletes are engaged in a mental race, the body has some of the same biofeedback signs as if they actually physically run the race. It's the same way in anything else we're doing. So if you're engaged in listening to a sad song, you are now creating the sadness chemicals and biofeedback in your body. So if you want more of that, continue to ingest more of that, and it's the same thing if you're putting your body. So I think the first thing is the basics of awareness, cataloging, and then looking at where you can simply reduce it a little bit. Turn the TV off a little bit, walk around, and then, but what are you replacing? So the idea is then just mapping that time into something that is alignment with where you want to be or how you want to feel. And so if you have to have the TV time, then great. Just maybe it's a comedy. Find something that there's a lot of people that have healed themselves, and it doesn't have to be the most holistic programming, but it could be making you laugh, and that in itself creates a more positive chemical state. So just being aware and then replacing, I think, is one of the healthiest starting points to kind of reprogramming how you're creating your day.
I think it's also important to be aware of and replace some of your friends. This is something that I've had to do because I've had just a couple of long-term friends that I just loved and had been in my life, almost like a bad habit. And I very much cared for them, but they were so negative. I hate my boss, I hate my friends, my boyfriend, he's a jerk, or just on and on and on. And these are people that just drain my energy. Every time I was with them, I just felt, very drained afterwards, draining of energy. So I think, can you talk a little bit about how we need to really, potentially replace some of our friends? And
you just brought up a really important point, is that energy drain. The flip side of that is, and I'm sure you have a lot of beautiful people, and like this conversation right now, I feel energized from it. It's a positive exchange, and everybody has had these experiences where there's certain friends that they love talking to them, and they, every time they're done, they feel more inspired, or ideas start to flow, or the blood starts pumping. And then there's other friends where, okay, we shared, and I was there for them, and I heard their sad story, or I got to listen to that over and over, or they see it in themselves, how every time they go to that person, they dump their stuff, and that exchange starts to go back forward, and then the other person feels like they need to dump in response, and oh yeah, I know what you're talking about, here's my bad story to match that one, and then you're creating, it's a self-fulfilling type of a situation. So I think it's a really important point to again have awareness and assess who are you spending your time with, what is their state of mind and being? How much are you investing in your daily basis? And people don't even realize that they've invested hours of the day or potentially days of the week repeating bad stories, gossips, jealousies, angers, whatever the case may be. And the simple fact is you have to make the tough decision to say it's not serving and be willing to step away from that. And you may potentially lose that friendship because they may be addicted to that exchange and they may not be in a place to be able to release that behavior. Yeah. But it's about being at cause with your own situation and realizing that in order to go to the next level, you got to surround yourself with the kind of people that are in the space that you want to be in. And it's really important what you mentioned.
Yeah, and for me, I felt really, really guilty letting go of these friends. I felt like, oh, I'm being a bad friend. If I'm a good person, I should be there for them and listen to their problems. But at a certain point, I think you have to look out for number one and care for yourself, because no one else is going to do that for you. And it can be very difficult to let go of even a spouse or a family member that is just draining or attacking you.
Looking out for number one is key. It really comes down to self-love. And it's funny how we, because of programming, because of social stigmas of guilt and shame and being a good friend, and what is the definition of a good friend, we're better friends to other people than we are ourselves. Yeah. And, during some of my hardest times, I had one of my close friends tell me, Mark, he says, there's a reason why if a plane is going into crisis and the masks drop, they say put the mask on yourself first, then you can help those around you. And that's it. I mean, energetically, just like you're talking about, you end up giving all your oxygen away to that friend that needed, the attention, and you're left there drained, no oxygen and unable to help yourself. So are you being a good friend to yourself first? Are you loving yourself first? And that means, curating the food you're eating, the people you're interacting with, and, the other content that you're ingesting on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I find that when people start eating healthier food and they start taking in minerals that their body desperately needs to function, like when people are on my Mineral Power program, I hear this over and over again, that people develop this physical and mental strength and become much more aware of themselves and their surroundings and get in touch with themselves, and they leave their job or leave their spouse because they have been able to lift themselves up to a better place with food and proper nutrition. Can you talk a little bit about how food helps us to do that and the difference between dead and live food?
Absolutely. You mentioned minerals, and minerals, we're just beginning to understand the technologies that are in crystals, and they're actually starting to refer to crystals as living things. These are growing bodies of energy. There's so much going on that we're not even aware of, but without having to get scientific about it, it's a simple fact of living versus dead food. The marketing machine has pushed us or guided the greater populace away from fresh vegetables and fruits and organics, and of course that wave is finally coming back in because people like you are doing great work out there. But growing up, you would have been more inclined to grab a bag of chips or something, fried or processed or bleached or starched, as opposed to something that was grown or could, potentially just came off the tree or out of the ground. And the other component of this, and why is it so important, not only is it the mineral content and the vitamin content, but it's the energy, it's the light, and it really plays into that quantum discussion. You hear the spiritual people say you are the light. Well, there is light in everything, and now we have science that's starting to feed back the truth in the biophotonic measurements, the light measurement that is our body. We give off light. Vegetables give off light. Anything that is alive has an energy around it, has a field, has an aura. So when you're taking in those foods, you're not only taking the physical nutrient and beginning that process, but you are also ingesting the electrical content, the light content, the energy at a greater level. So the more aliveness you take in, the more alive you feel. And whereas the flip side, the more of this dead products, the more you're actually kind of gumming up the system. And for the auto enthusiasts out there, I kind of compare it to we put so much time and energy into making sure the fuel's just right and the oil's just right, and we got to clean it out because if there's a little bit of gunk, it won't work well. And then there's the same people that are, munching on everything they get their hands on, and taking that into their engine and their system, and not giving themselves an opportunity to function at optimal speeds or optimal clarity or whatever the case may be. But taking in light, taking in living foods, before you even get into the complexities of which ones, I think is the basics. There's a lot that we don't know, and there's a lot in the idea of the living organisms and the energy that comes from with.
What is the relevance to our brains and bodies beyond what we understand at a physical level, like the energy and growth, etc.?
We are senders and receivers of information, and we are all connected. What does that mean in terms of we are all connected? And it goes into field science. And field science is in terms of our connection to not only each other's, but the universe as a whole, and that kind of butterfly effect that you were talking about earlier of when you do something, it goes out there. It touches the atoms that are in the air that are around you, and they touch more atoms, and they touch, and it conveys out into the universe. So all of this is affecting. So the chemical state that we create is altering our overall vibration. Whether we're happy or we're sad, whether we're vibrant or weighed down energetically, are all components of our overall vibration, and therefore affecting everybody around us. And you've seen people walk into a room that are down and kind of heavy or having a bad day, and it doesn't even have to be super angry. But not only did they bring that into the room, but people can train to that, and all of a sudden it'll kind of drag the energy of the whole room down. Flip side, when a Susan Leahy walks into the room, right? Suddenly everybody's up.
Boom!
Exactly.
That's why she's a motivational speaker.
Absolutely, and it's a brilliant example of how that attitude is contagious, and it's contagious not only, like I said, to the people within that room, but it's the entire collective. Remember the trains, the city trains that had the two wires above, and so that's where it's drawing the power. Kind of think of it this way: as our brains, our spinal cords, our pineal gland, which we weren't taught about in anatomy class as kids, which recognizes frequency at a spectrum beyond what we see. All of this functioning as a whole is a two-way radio of vibration that interacts with the world around us. And it's interesting, in some of the same studies that Dr. Moto and some other scientists were doing, one of them was the monitoring of either plants or rice, and then positive affirmations, negative affirmations, and neglect. And what was interesting is the positive affirmations, the rice, the plants either grew the tallest, or the rice stayed the healthiest the longest. The negative affirmations, you would expect, obviously rotted more quickly, or the plants didn't grow as high. But the worst of the two was neglect, meaning just being ignored. And so that's the important part, is to realize that there is a connectivity among all things and all systems. And so what we're constantly putting out a vibration, and that vibration is being reflected back to us in the events that we're interacting with, or that we're creating in our life, or the people that we're attracting. So it circles back and reaffirms what you were saying in terms of the friends that you have, the food you're ingesting. You could almost kind of play it as a game and start to look at how your life, how massively it'll affect your life. And all you're doing is really just turning up the volume on your way of being, and in order to attract more positivity into your life, rather than complaining about things yet continuing to do the same things.
Yeah. I love the example you gave about the plants that were neglected were not doing so hot, because my uncle, who's passed away now, he was trying to break the world's record for growing the tallest tomato plants. And he was doing them organically, and that's one thing he did, was he talked to the plants every day. I thought it was kind of nuts, but it makes sense now, because he would talk to them and sing to them and give them good energy. He was a very spiritual person, but unfortunately I don't think he talked to them enough, because they only got 18 foot and the world record was 32 foot.
Wow. Well, 18 foot, he's still a champion in my book.
Yeah. What do you keep trying?
18 inches, I think, might be the max of anything I've ever grown. So it's I don't have the green thumb, but I do understand it, and that's probably because I was never around enough to talk and or sing to them.
Yeah.
But yeah, most good gardeners and um people that are grow their food and that absolutely do exchange energy with the plants or flowers or that they're caretaking for, and it's the same way with our animals, and the more we pay attention and own that interactivity, that attention, the more we realize that it truly is impactful and something that we could be doing more of and be more in control of our environment and more in control of what's going on every day.
I've been listening to your Life Changes show, and you talk a lot about an idea called SOS. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, we've touched on various components of SOS through this conversation, and yeah, it's a term that I coined a while back when I started to understand the what is now somewhat more common, but this idea that we are programmed, we are programmed beings, and that our brains function like a computer program that's connected, to a larger mainframe of information. And then I started thinking, well, wow, okay, if you have someone that grew up in rural Mississippi and someone that grew up, in Siberia or the Middle East, and they had only access to the influences that they had in that area, and the culture and the input and the shows and the local behaviors, how could they know anything different? And it became, with every hug, every startle from birth, and some say before, but if you take that blueprint of every moment of activity as a line of code that goes into programming our operating system, then I coined the idea of looking at your self-operating system, which is where SOS comes from, is the idea that everybody has a very unique program. And some can be as different as Windows and Mac, and they just won't run, they won't see eye to eye, they won't run the same programs. And so when you look at that from a perspective of where did the programming come from, and you look at your parents and you look, or caretakers if they were raised by their grandparents or brothers or sisters, and what were their influences or what were their belief systems at the time. And I had Ginger Laisure version 1936, with a certain Catholic background, and there's these certain things which are going to give me a very different programming than someone that had Shirley whatever version 1950 or whatever the case may be. There's a very different. You can actually break down the programming basis for how we are. How we behave. And what it does is when you start to look at this base of programming, it takes the ego out of it, and you start to have compassion for someone again who we want to be quick to, we as a society want to be very quick to call people something, a racist or a this or that, or how could they do this? But when you step back from the ego of it and you start to have compassion for looking at what their story might be or where they had their influences, then you can start to not only understand and have compassion for how they got where they are, but then maybe have an opportunity to where you can serve up more awareness to that community or that person, and then potentially change the programming and its worldview. And it really is about altering a program, because a viral video, this reminds me of a viral video that's been out lately, and it's a self-professed redneck who goes in kind of calling out racism and how he used to be a racist and he's no longer a racist, and it really is so intelligent and so well spoken, and he couldn't sound more or be more redneck in the way where he comes from. But yet this very evolved way of, we got to put a stop to this, we got to be accountable, we can change the way we treat others, comes through. And there's a perfect version of reprogramming, and it's not, didn't come in the same wrapper that it may have been seemed to have come in initially.
Are there some exercises that people can do to, increase their positive thoughts and create, an ideal, impact on their body?
Yes, and a lot of it is through repetition, but you're hearing a lot more. I think the very notion of meditation has come through for starters. So the idea of shutting down the mind is the first start, getting control of the chatter. and oftentimes the negative thinking, which is just continuing to affirm some of the things that you don't necessarily want, or that are changes or challenges or fears or hesitations. And so the idea of bringing that under control, which used to be kind of an Eastern thing, is now obviously becoming much more accepted and put into practice across the mainstream culture, the Western culture. But that leads to all sorts of other positive results in our body chemistry, in our balance, therefore our uptake and utilization of the foods that we're eating and the nutrients. But once you get control of your mind, the next thing is, again, what are you putting into it? So the use of affirmations, being very specific with what you want in your life, for your family, for yourself, and writing that out, and then repeating that, whether it's through mantras, whether you're doing meditation, whether it's having it written there so you're seeing it oftentimes throughout the day, and therefore getting positive reinforcement by just viewing it. Maybe putting affirmations in the office or on your computer, or some people do it in the mirror in the bathroom, so that there's places that you're often going, and then your conscious mind sees it, or even if you're not necessarily paying attention, your subconscious mind is taking that in. So every one of those pings, every one of those hits, that you see that you repeat it, that you have it played to you in your ears at night or through meditation exercises, those are ways of reprogramming the brain and building new habits, just like advertisers do use the repetition in selling you this stuff over and over. You're selling yourself on the things that you really want, and or selling yourself on a more positive way of self-loving or looking at yourself, as opposed to maybe how you've been doing it before.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for, all of that amazing insight and all that information. I know that the listeners are going to get a lot of, benefit from, doing all these exercises that you suggested. I think it's so important. And, I think a lot of people don't want to take the time to do these things. I find myself, I'm too busy, I have so much to do, but I have to take the time to meditate. I force myself to take quiet time for myself and to stay calm, because I'm really, really stressed out. It's very hard, I think, to, change your thinking. I think it's very easy to get stuck and that stressed out negative kind of vibration. So it's very important for people to take time to do that.
Well, taking time, last thing, thank you for having me on, and I've really enjoyed the discussion. The one thing I would say, validating your point, is, again, we are willing and we take time to do other things, and then we say we're too busy, and yet we're asking for change in our lives. So be willing to invest in yourself. To take, the investment in change, the investment in changing your habits and building new and better habits is every bit as important as an investment you'd make in the market, or in a new home, or a new car. And if you're too busy for exercise, then how can you change your way of being, and therefore create a better life? So you need to be able to invest in that hour on the gym, or on the hiking trail, or in these types of practices.
I have a question I like to ask all of my guests. Can you give me your opinion of what you think is the most pressing health issue in the world today?
The most pressing health issue in the world today, I think, is, it falls under the banner that we've been touching on, would be mental health, but I think it goes down to something more specific, which is balance. I think we getting to a mental state and living in a mental state of balance, as opposed to the contrary of that, which is where that word dis-ease comes from. Dis-ease is, in essence, out of balance, and it will manifest somewhere in your organs or in your body, or throughout. And so the most pressing issue is really being able to achieve balance, because I think it affects all of those areas that you're trying to attack, and or you may be combating at an individual level. I know people that are still taking multiple drugs for different small issues, and thinking, well, I can fix this with this and fix it with that. Whereas at the end of the day, if they're in balance, that'll bring everything into alignment, and they can let go of a lot of the targeting from a pharmaceutical level or other aspects.
Can you tell the listeners where they can find you and learn more about your Life Changes show?
Absolutely. The Life Changes show is at lifechangesnetwork.com, or the lifechangesshow.com. We are on Facebook at The Life Changes Show and Twitter, Life Changes Show. And again, it's hosted by Filippo Voltaggio and co-hosted by myself. And we hope you join us on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, or go to our website for the archive. There's a great many shows there that may answer some of the questions you're looking to achieve answers to.
Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, and I'm happy that we finally did our show together.
Me too. Thank you for having me and for all the great work you're doing. I really, really enjoy the newsletter and listening to your podcast, and it's awesome.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. And listeners, go to my website, live110.com, if you want to learn more about natural healing and detoxification and my Mineral Power program. You can find that at mineralpower.com. And again, thank you so much for listening to the Live to 110 podcast.
So back in 2009, I was over 220 pounds. I had high blood pressure. I was a borderline diabetic, and I wasn't really happy with the way things were going. And I went to my doctor. My wife had urged me to go and basically just get a checkup. And she was like, you haven't had a physical in a long time, like since I met you, why don't you go get yourself checked out, make sure everything is healthy. We were planning on having kids, so she wanted to make sure everything was in order with that. So I was like, okay, I definitely will. Went, and that's when they told me, hey, you have high blood pressure and you're borderline diabetic. You might want to take care of some of these things. So I went home, and the other frustrating thing was I had been trying to lose weight. Like, I'd been doing the traditional approach, counting calories and going to the gym a lot and doing a lot of exercise. I was trying to do running. And the only thing that was happening was I was getting tired all of the time. And I was completely out of energy, and my weight would fluctuate. I would make some progress, but then I would, relapse, and I would binge. And so what happened was I would lose 5 or 10 pounds, then I would gain like 15 back. And just through that process over and over and over again, worked my way up to 220. So I kind of felt leaving the doctor's office kind of hopeless because I didn't really have a plan of action. I knew that if I went back and just tried to do the dieting thing that I was doing, that it was going to end in the same result. So I went online and I was like, okay, I'm going to look for people who are saying something completely different from what I have heard in the past and what I've tried in the past. And I came across the real food movement and started to implement a lot of the principles there and saw really great initial progress. I think I got down to 175, 180, something like that. And then, I started getting hit with some of these like psychological triggers. So I felt like I had made good progress. So I started rewarding myself for doing that. Sugar cravings that I had previously had came roaring back. Started binging again, that kind of thing. And in the back of my mind, I think I was telling myself also, you can go ahead and do these things because you have the answer now. Like you can get back on track whenever you want. And of course, that's a lie. So through this process, I eventually decided, well, okay, I obviously don't have like the mental part of this down. Like I got the physical, facts in order, but my mindset is still out of control. It's still manipulating my behavior. So that's when I really started to dive into the psychology side of things. And through the work that I did there, I was able to beat a lot of these triggers and get down to, my current weight, which is about 165, and have maintained that for years. And Rebooted Body was born kind of out of that journey. A couple of friends who saw me do that process started